Hey guys, it's been a while since I did a vlog, and today I want to talk a little bit more about Amnesia. Yeah, I know, I keep talking and talking about Amnesia, the story, the characters, but I just can't get enough of it. And sometimes it's a little, I don't know if I should say annoying or kind of upsetting that there are quite a few people in the fandom who don't fully understand the characters and story. To be fair, that's not totally their fault. I have to admit I kind of blame this a little bit on some Let's Players because as much as you might be watching a game with a person who's playing it and you're trying to follow the story and everything, sometimes what they say or how they react to the characters and stuff like that sort of might impact your own view as opposed to you being able to form your own opinion of the characters. And I've been kind of guilty of that myself. Basically what I want to kind of explain is that some of the common ideas based around the Dark Descent specifically, some of them are not right. And I'm not trying to say that, you're an idiot and I'm better than you, nothing like that. So what I'm going to do is just list a few misconceptions about the game's story and then kind of explain why they're wrong. Again, if you believe any of these, doesn't mean you're an idiot, and I'm not trying to personally attack you. I'm just trying to explain why that's not right. That's just what I think I need to do, because a lot of people seem to have misconceptions about this game. Without further ado, let's get started. A common misconception is that the basic idea of Amnesia is good versus evil, which is kind of missing the point entirely. Fictional games wanted to get across the idea of it all being a matter of circumstance. The fact that these characters were all victims of the certain circumstances that they were in, and based on these situations, they would do desperate measures because that's what they were forced into. And that the idea is that good people can be driven to do evil things, but that doesn't automatically make them evil, because it could be done by any one of us if we were in that same situation. And I think a lot of people kind of look over this and think that either Daniel or Alexander is irredeemable and therefore deserves to die. Now, you could definitely think that one of them is more wrong than the other, which is what most fans think. They either side with Daniel or Alexander in that regard. But there are some that on the opposition side of the character that maybe they can't sympathize with as well, most often Alexander, is that he's completely evil, sadistic, and an asshole, basically. Which isn't the point. They tried in the game to, yes, show the horrible things he's done, but also try to make him likable as well. The commentary actually says that. But you might think, oh, it's really hard to see him in a likable light, so to speak, because he's tortured and killed hundreds of people, and he's even killed animals, which is pretty disgusting, right? But the thing is, first of all, we have to take a step back and realize that he's not human. He's from another world. We don't know what kind of world he's from, but he was banished to Earth, and we have to wonder how he views humans. Does he see them on his own level? And based on his memory capsules, he really doesn't. He sort of sees only a few as his equals, sort of like Agrippa, Wire, and even Daniel. But most other humans, he sort of thinks as inferior to himself. Which is kind of weird at first, because you're like, okay, that's horrible. He's treating us like we're beneath him. That's not something to sympathize with. Sort of like how we treat animals or something like that. So, the fact is, we see it as okay if we use animals as a food source, or, as an entertainment source for zoos and whatnot. Not everyone agrees with that, but a good portion of the population is fine with it. Let's just move on. So, if we sort of look at it in that sort of point of view, it's kind of easier to understand Alexander's way of thinking. Also, the idea is that he sees these people as criminals, and maybe, I think after a point, he started, getting as many people as he could, even if they weren't criminals, but sort of internally convinces himself of that, because he believes the ends justify the means. And he writes in a memory capsule that he knows he's a monster to the humans because of everything that he has done. And he's been in danger of being killed by them because of what he's done. But overall, as much as it might pain him, I think he maybe deep down does regret killing all these people, but we don't get a really in-depth sense of that because he's so he's so calloused over the years of doing it that he's become desensitized, and he's become able to hide his emotions and insecurities very well. That the point is that he'll do whatever it takes to get home and back to his lover, because he's guilt-tripping Daniel even though he's going through a very sensitive time in his descent, finally learning about his crimes. He's, but he's also mentioning that it's not always about good versus evil. He says, Daniel, you might feel betrayed, but, I was betrayed in the past by, Agrippa and Wire, and I'm not trying to gain power or do anything evil or whatever. You committed evil by killing and torturing a bunch of people, too. So it's sort of a give and take thing here, that Alexander is not pure evil, and Daniel isn't pure evil either. The Amnesia characters all function on a gray scale. And based on your point of view, some might be a lighter gray, some might be in darker gray. Alexander is desperate. He wants to go home so bad he's been waiting centuries to do it, which speaks a lot about his devotion. And the idea that he would do anything to get back, it's sort of sad in a way that you realize that he's been away from something and somewhere and someone that he loves for so long. He can't do anything about it other than perform these rituals and torture people because only just to extend his own life. I think, as we can see in some of the notes, he tried to create artificial vitae. He didn't want to kill people and torture people at first. I have explained numerous times why Daniel isn't a sadist either. Frictional games actually took inspiration from 2 experiments in the past that showed us that good people, normal good people like you and me, if told by an authority figure to do something in a certain circumstance, they would do wrong. Seriously, look these experiments up. They're very fascinating. They even show that people who had no prior history of sadism could even gain a sense of it if they had authority over inferiors or people who were supposed to be their inferiors. It shows that any person can fall victim to the same things that Daniel did. As much as he got into the paint the man cut the line scene, if you were in his position, you probably would have done the same thing. And it's not just like, oh, that person is weak-minded, oh, that person was, naive and gullible. It's like, no, this is something that any of us would do, and it's easier for us to say, oh, no, I wouldn't do that, because we're not in that situation. It's sort of almost like, I don't want to imagine myself being able to do those sort of things, so that person obviously was weak-minded or a coward or already wicked and cruel. But that's not the point Amnesia is trying to make. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to address you with the fact that, yeah, you could do this in the right circumstances. Anyone would. Especially when we consider that Daniel has been seeing people he knows die, seeing anyone else he comes into contact die, dealing with a supernatural orb that seems to emanate madness, and then being in fear of death himself, having no sleep because he's haunted by horrible nightmares each night, and then resorting to drugs, which obviously also fuck him up a bit, so he's dealing with a lot of shit by the time he gets to Brandenburg. And then he takes the amnesia potion, which erases all his memories, and able to go down into the depths to stop Alexander. That's not a weak character. The idea of amnesia is that everything is based on circumstances, not everything is black and white, good versus evil, and to simplify it in that way is to completely miss the point of the story. Continuing from that, I kind of want to debunk some ideas of what the Daniel character is like. He's supposed to be human, he's supposed to be, in the end, a good character, a well-rounded character, because he has a lot of flaws and weaknesses, but also a lot of strengths and goodness to him, based on the idea of, we see that, yes, he did horrible things in order to save his own life, but at the same time, he also realized he had to stop Alexander and make things right in the end, and so he did what he could to get his strength back, which was erase his memories, and then do the right thing. And based on what ending you get, I think if you do the Agrippa ending, then Daniel's really redeemed himself and realized that saving a life is more important than taking another one. Overall, though, some people get the idea that he's just been a wimp and just, like a fanboy following Alexander around the castle, or he's an idiot who just needs to be told what to do. Let me address first the idea that he's a wimp, which he is not. He was willing to take the amnesia potion to start his journey all the way over again, to relearn what he's done to himself and done to others, to stop someone who's wronged him, and going through all these horrible, terrifying areas of the castle that he won't even remember, just to set things right, which says a lot about him. It was one thing to want to save his own ass by killing other people, but anyone would have done the same thing. Yeah, okay, there's the sanity meter thing that he's just afraid of being in the dark, but the fact is, one, that's a gameplay mechanic, and two, you can't blame him because of all the ridiculous things he's gone through. You know, he's on so many drugs as well. You gotta give the guy a break because you gotta see it from his point of view and what he's dealing with. And I think a lot of people understand this, at least. That, you know, yeah, if I had to go through the same thing, I probably would have just stopped, or I wouldn't even taken the amnesia potion to begin with. I would just let the shadow kill me. And I think that's what a lot of us would have done. I think I probably would have done the same thing. Daniel realized that it was worth it to put himself in harm's way for the first time to do the right thing. There's really no in-game evidence of him being a wimp at all. He's wondering at one point why it's dark in the refinery, but that's just the question. He's just like, what's the reason for it? He doesn't sound visibly scared. He's just like, okay, why is it so dark in here? Anyone who was a coward would have just curled up into a ball and let the shadow kill them, and, you know, refused to do anything, you know, noble or right about what they've done because they don't have the strength or, you know, courage to do so. The fact that he's suffering so much when he's dealing with Brandenburg and that he's being able to at least function somewhat dealing with all of this stuff, and then manages to turn himself around, realize that he's done wrong, and then set out to right it, says a lot. There's a lot of people that seem to think that Daniel's a fanboy to Alexander, and there's a difference between being impressed by Alexander's work and being a fanboy of Alexander. Make no mistake, Daniel is definitely impressed by Brandenburg and by, you know, Alexander's work. After all, he sort of talks about it in his journal entries saying, oh, there's like all these areas for, you know, studying anatomy and botany and all that stuff, which is, you know, of course any of us would be impressed by that sort of things, and like, you're in a castle, how cool is that? Basically, it's showing us that, yeah, Daniel is definitely taking an interest in the castle, but a lot of us would be, especially with the areas that are supernatural in origin, like the chancel, the inner sanctum, the orb chamber. It's like, holy hell, this guy has all this stuff down here, this is so cool. Daniel at no point is actually sounding like he's freaking out to the point of fanboy levels. He's just like, I think the closest he gets to is in the chancel. He's like, it's like Orpheus descending into the underworld. Which is probably a lot of our reactions would be. I mean, maybe not directly, you know, referencing mythology, but going, oh my gosh, this is so cool, because the chancel is one of the areas that really looks like something else is at work here besides, you know, just the typical baron in a castle sort of thing. It's like, wow, this is really neat. And being like, oh, okay, this is really the start of something impressive, this is really neat, is not the same as, oh my gosh, Alexander Senpai, what are we going to do? First of all, realize that in the flashbacks, Daniel was falling behind Alexander. So he was bringing him down to the inner sanctum, and so he was giving him sort of a tour along the way. Being impressed and being interested in a certain location does not automatically bring you to obsessed or, you know, clingy status, I should say. In the refinery, Daniel is not clinging to Alexander's robes and saying, oh, it sure is dark in here. He asks why it's so dark, and when Alexander doesn't answer him, he gets annoyed. He doesn't cry, he doesn't freak out, he just goes, what's the reason? Why is it so dark? And Alexander instead tells him to shut up and keep walking. As much as we don't know what the rest of that conversation was about, it doesn't seem like Daniel is totally going along with everything that Alexander does, which is what a fanboy would do. You know, he tells Alexander, isn't all this a bit excessive just to get to a certain room? He's questioning Alexander's ideas and construction of his castle even. Even when Alexander is telling Daniel about the torture and whatnot, and Daniel's listening to what he's saying, he's not saying, yes, okay, I'll do all that stuff. He's just saying, understood. I know what I'm going to be doing. It's very methodical, it's seemingly rational, which makes it a little bit more unsettling. Daniel is basically relying on Alexander's knowledge of the occult. To rely on somebody else's knowledge, maybe that is a little on the naive side, but the fact of the matter is, he's not totally like, oh my gosh, I fall at your feet because you know all this stuff. Alexander obviously proved he knew what he was talking about in the orb chamber by, you know, summoning all this power and stuff, and when the shadow showed up, he was able to stop it right in its tracks. So Daniel's like, okay, we're on to something here, and this is really cool. This could be the really start of something amazing if we can harness the orb's power for ourselves. Daniel is definitely impressed, as I said before. He is interested in how the castle functions. He is interested in Alexander's work. And he definitely says, oh, Alexander seems to be a gracious guy. I mean, he's not as eccentric as I imagined he would be, but he seems nice, you know. Just listen to the tone of voice Daniel has in these journal entries. Appreciative, but not excessive. They're thankful for Alexander for helping him out, but they're not to the point of fawning at his feet and worshipping the guy. He questions Alexander every step of the way, and so there you have it. The biggest misconception about Daniel is that he is an idiot. First of all, to ask questions and to learn more is not the sign of an idiot, it's a sign of somebody who wants to learn about how Brennenburg Castle works, which is a lot of the flashbacks. He is also skeptical about Alexander's claims and everything like that, but he goes along with it because he has no one else to turn to. Even after he's seen what Alexander can do with the orbs, he is still a little bit skeptical, wondering, you know, okay, this guy obviously wants to gain something from all this because, I mean, he wouldn't just tell me like this out of the blue. What does he stand to gain? A lot of the lines that people say, oh, Daniel, you're an idiot, really, you have to take things in context. Let's just take them one line at a time. One line that a lot of people seem to think that Daniel is stupid for is the water is for drinking line. A lot of people seem to think that Daniel's an idiot for suggesting that, you know, water could be used for drinking, but I don't think what they understand is that this takes place in the Victorian era. Drinking water was not so easily accessible back then. It's perfectly reasonable for Daniel to have asked if he could drink the water, because that was a rare thing in the Victorian era. It's not like today if we ask, oh yeah, we can use water for drinking, it's like, duh, but back then it was a bit of a different story. Another question about saying, Daniel is stupid, is the question that Daniel asks before they go to the morgue. This is right after Daniel's before like a warding ritual, and Alexander's like, okay, let's get out of here and get some peace, and Daniel's like, yes, let's, I'm done with all this stuff, where are we going to? And Alexander says, right down here to the morgue, which is not where Daniel wants to be right now, and this was kind of just flung on him after just dealing with something as traumatic as a warding ritual, and so he's visibly uncomfortable, and he's just thinks of the first thing that comes to his head, which is, are there more dead men there? Which he really doesn't want to see right now. He's seen somebody die, perhaps for the first time. And that does something to somebody. It's very traumatic to see that, especially if you're the one who's killing them. And so to see even more of that after that, it's too much for him. And the question is not so much, oh, he's really asking if there are dead men in the morgue, what is he, an idiot? It's more like, it's more in the sense of, do we really have to go there? Do I really have to see more of this? Also an obvious question that comes out because he's uncomfortable. It's sort of like when Let's Players play the game and they're in the prison and it's like, please don't be a grunt around this corner now. There probably is going to be one. It's like, duh, they're all over the prison. But the fact is that they ask the questions like, yeah, duh, why'd you ask it? But it's because they're uncomfortable, and just to speak sometimes is enough to cool their nerves to help them through it, and that's what Daniel was doing here. A combination of the two, I would say. It was an expression of discomfort, and as a way of trying to maybe show through his tone that I don't really want to go in there, which you can clearly tell in his tone of voice. Some people say, you know, Daniel might be book smart, but he's not, you know, doesn't have common sense. He does. But you have to realize, one, the situation, and two, take it in context, so realize the era that he's in. And then things start to make a little bit more sense, and why he may have asked these things, or acted this way. Daniel was, you know, again, he was skeptical the entire time. It was only until it was absolutely proved, until Alexander absolutely proved himself using the orbs and everything, that he knew what he was talking about. And even then Daniel was like, okay, but what does he stand to gain? And taking the other lines he said into context, it all sort of falls in that Daniel is not an idiot. He's a smart guy who might be having a few moments of saying something a little bit on the obvious side, but he's in a very vulnerable area of his life, and to have dealt with it as well as he's done is impressive. This is going to be a quick one, but the idea is that a lot of people seem to put this story into a modern context with maybe the beliefs of the characters or the way the story is presented, or, modern ideals, as opposed to the Victorian era ideals is where the story takes place, which I think is a big problem because the two are very different. So when you're examining a part of the story or a part of the characters and how they act, remember that this is a story taking place in the Victorian era, which has a completely different set of beliefs than modern day, and must be taken into consideration for the story and characters to be fully understood. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I have to talk about it though, because a lot of people get this idea and it drives me crazy. The idea is that people think that based on the guest room flashback where Daniel is woken up from a nightmare and then Alexander's there to say, oh, are you okay? We'll make sure your nightmares go away. They think that afterwards Alexander sexually assaulted Daniel. Okay, let's just start with this. One, Alexander's not that type of person. Alexander has waited centuries, and it's been implied over the years, especially by Machine for Pigs, that he's had human families. Why would he all of a sudden do that to Daniel? Because he's trying to gain his trust, and to do that would break it. If there's anything that we've understood from Alexander's interactions with Daniel, it's that he's an extremely reserved person. If he can keep the secrets about who he is from the general populace for centuries, then he could definitely keep that down. And it doesn't even seem like that's really on his mind anyway. He's focused on getting home right now. Why would he be like, oh, hey there, Daniel, I see you're having nightmares. It's like, really? It makes Alexander to be turn into a complete villain instead of an anti-hero, which is what he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be in a gray area and not to be completely detestable. Fictional games said it themselves that they were trying to make Alexander likable despite all the horrible things he has done, and some people picked up on that. And you know what? A likable character doesn't rape people! I forgot to mention this. Alexander's wrongdoings were all related to his end goal. The reason it's out of character is because it would remove all likability. Also, the only reason he did bad things to begin with was for the means of going home. If he commits something detestable for the sake of debased needs or power, it's no longer about being a victim of circumstances, but about being a villain. That is not what Fictional wanted Alexander to be. That is cliché, cut and dry, and goes back to the idea of black and white. The idea is for Alexander to have good parts of himself as well as bad. And to only make him seem more bad and more detestable makes it easier to punish him when it should be a complex issue, and we wonder if he really should be or not. Now let's examine the scene itself. Daniel's having a nightmare, and it's been implied he was screaming. Alexander comes to check up on him. Now, knowing that this is an audio flashback, we don't know if Alexander's standing over the bed, or if he's just opened the room to the bedroom and calling out to Daniel from it. We don't know. So don't automatically assume, oh, he's standing right over his bed. And even if he was, so what? Look at it from Alexander's point of view. You have a guest who is dealing with the orb for the first time. It's driving them crazy. It's giving them horrible nightmares that are from the shadow, talking about that voice from the void. And Daniel thinking about all the people who's died because of him. And then he's screaming in his sleep, and it's even happening even while he's staying at Brennenburg. Now, Alexander hears this. It's kind of hard not to hear it if your guest is screaming blood-curdling screams through his castle. So he's checking up on his guest. That's what he's doing. He's seeing if he's alright, because obviously, if something screaming is going on, you want to know where it's coming from. Especially if it's from your guest. So, to check up on Daniel is to show that, one, that Alexander is a good host, and two, also to kind of develop a bit more of a trust relationship between himself and Daniel. And also, I think it might even imply that Alexander does care about Daniel's well-being, and is kind of regretful in the end that he has to turn his back on him, because he's tainted by the shadow and he can't save him no matter what. This also ties into one of the diary entries that Daniel wrote, about his screams, and that Alexander woke him in the early morning and said, he'd heard him, and now it's time to go into the parlor to have a chat. That's probably what happened after this flashback. Also, another thing, the fact that Daniel has also written about torture that Alexander got him involved in, the warding rituals, every single gritty detail about the story thus far has been revealed through Daniel's journal. If anything sexual had happened, he would have written about it. And you might say, oh no, he wouldn't, it's a Victorian era, they would keep it in private. They would also keep torture in private, and murder, and occult rituals with some kind of relic that can cause madness and transport between worlds. it's not like Daniel wouldn't keep it out just because it's taboo. And because it wasn't mentioned, therefore it didn't happen. He would have written about it if it had. And he wouldn't have trusted Alexander as much as he did if Alexander had done that to him. Daniel doesn't have Stockholm Syndrome. He doesn't say, oh, Alexander, I'll do anything for you because you have treated me like shit. No, he doesn't. He sees Alexander as like a business partner, or even maybe even like a friend, who he's gotten to know over the course of this, who's also in a terrible circumstantial problem that he has. And they realize, okay, you know what, we're both being screwed over, and maybe the orb can help us both. Let's try to work together on this. No, there was nothing like that in the story, and it annoys me that a lot of people get this idea from Let's Players. They're like, oh, that's weird. No, it might be a little bit weird because, one, Alexander is an alien, so he doesn't have the same idea and concepts maybe of interaction that we do, and sort of shows them in different ways, i.e. going into your room to make sure you're okay after you've been screaming. You know, he's showing that he's a good host and that he cares about Daniel. He could have just gone, okay, he's screaming, whatever, let's keep going, but he did go in there just to make sure, hey, are you alright, you know? Daniel is not a wimp who would have just taken it, especially. Alexander, again, was described as old and weak. This is Daniel. This is a guy who has seen Alexander work in the torture rooms, who can tell what the guy can do and can't do. If he was trying to force himself on Daniel and Daniel didn't want it, he would have been able to fight Alexander off. And that's the simple fact about it. He would have tried to fight Alexander off and said, screw you, I'm not helping you anymore, or anything like that. Or maybe he would have even tried to kill Alexander then. Who knows? Alexander's not an idiot. He wouldn't, even if he did want that from Daniel, which he doesn't because he has a lover, and he also even had human families, which he probably did up just to keep up appearances, but he wouldn't do it because he's not an idiot. He wouldn't put himself into a position where Daniel could easily kill him like that. The Dark Descent has nothing to do with sex. It has nothing to do with all that stuff. It has to deal with the fact of desperate situations and showing that people are not black and white, that they're gray. You know, it's supposed to show that through Alexander too. That he might have been banished. We don't know if it was for something wrong he did or if it was something he was wrongly accused for. But either way, they're both in similar circumstances. They're trapped and they need the orbs to get out. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about Daniel's age, because a lot of people seem to think he's either a lot younger or a lot older than probably what he really is. We get no specific age number for him, but I think we can get a general idea based on, I think, two big factors that the game shows us. One is that, you know, in loading screens and, you know, based on Agrippa calling him boy, you know, they call him young man and something like that, gives the idea that he's probably under 30. I mean, even if the developers are calling him a young man, he's probably not that old, which, I don't know, some people seem to think he's in his 30s. That might be young in our terms, but I think that was kind of old in the Victorian times. So I would put him around mid-20s. A lot of people seem to think that he is maybe a lot younger, like just 20 or even like 19 or something, but I think the biggest factor of that is, one, he has a job. He's not like in school anymore. He happens to just work at the university as Professor Herbert's assistant, not to mention that he also happens to live by himself in the district of Mayfair in London, which actually happens to be a rich district of the city. So that would imply that he has an actual job and is not just, you know, like a teenager putting himself through school. And also, his voice. His voice is rather deep for it to be someone younger than that. If you look at the official art, the voice matches that perfectly, and what is shown is sort of like, basically you have to just look up Richard Topping, the actor who plays Daniel, and that's probably a good idea of what he looks like. Maybe just like a little bit younger and then give him long hair. I think you just need to get a better idea that Daniel is even a little bit of a beefy looking guy. He's not like a puny dude. He's actually pretty strong, based on even in the game he's able to move huge, you know, rocks and planks of wood out of his way when he gets blocked in a room or something like that. So this concludes my Amnesia Misconceptions video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and again, I didn't mean anything personally about all this, and I didn't mean to attack anyone, and I hope to have more vlogs and videos out in the future. See you guys!